It was a sunny afternoon at an exclusive charity event in Manila, the kind where luxury cars lined the driveway and men in tailored suits shook hands under crystal chandeliers. Among the guests, a simple man in a plain barong walked quietly through the lobby. No bodyguards, no flashy jewelry, just calm confidence in his eyes. That man was Manny Pacquiao, but at first glance few realized it. He had come to support a scholarship fundraiser, quietly, humbly, without making a scene. Manny was never one to flaunt his fame. He believed respect was earned through character, not status. But standing across the room was Roy Chiongbian, a well-known businessman and political figure, proud, polished, and used to being the most powerful man in any room. When his eyes landed on Manny, he frowned slightly. To him, Manny looked out of place and too simple, too ordinary for such an event. Leaning toward a nearby security guard, Roy muttered under his breath, "Who let that guy in? He doesn't belong here. Remove him." The guard hesitated, unsure. "Sir, I said remove him," Roy interrupted sharply. Moments later, two security officers walked up to Manny. Guests turned to watch. Some whispered, others filmed quietly on their phones. The atmosphere shifted. That uneasy tension when power is being misused. One guard cleared his throat. "Sir, we need to ask you to step outside." Manny looked puzzled but calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" The guard glanced at Roy, then back at Manny. "This area is for invited guests only." Manny gave a small smile. "I see. Well, I was invited." His tone was respectful, not defensive. Roy's voice cut through the murmurs. "You're disturbing the event. Please leave before this becomes embarrassing." Manny's wife, Jinky, gently touched his arm, worried. But he remained composed, his humility unshaken. The entire room watched as the world champion faced humiliation. Quietly, respectfully. And in that silence, something powerful was about to happen. What Manny did next stunned everyone in the room, even Roy himself. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom turned heavy. Conversations quieted, and all eyes drifted toward the unfolding scene near the main entrance. Two security guards, hesitant but following orders, stood in front of Manny Pacquiao, the man they still didn't recognize. Roy Chiongbian's voice echoed across the marble floor. "You heard me. Escort him out, now." Gasps rippled through the room. Even those who didn't yet know who Manny was could sense the imbalance. A powerful man humiliating someone who had done nothing wrong. Manny raised his hand gently, signaling calm. "It's all right," he said softly. "If I'm not welcome, I'll leave." But something in his tone stopped the guards mid-step. It wasn't anger. It was dignity, quiet, unshaken, impossible to ignore. One of the security guards, clearly uncomfortable, stammered, "Sir, we were just told you don't have an invitation." Manny reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a formal invitation, embossed with the charity's logo and signed by one of the event organizers. He handed it over calmly. "I believe this should clear things up." The guard looked confused, glancing back at Roy, who now looked slightly taken aback but unwilling to back down. "Anyone can print an invitation," Roy said coldly. "I don't care who sent it. This is a private event for people who actually contribute." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. They could feel the arrogance dripping from his words. Some began recording discreetly, their phones half hidden behind wine glasses and purses. Manny looked down for a moment, almost as if offering Roy one last chance to stop. Then he looked up, meeting his eyes, steady, calm, yet firm. "Sir, I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came here to help raise funds for children who can't afford school. That's all." There was no anger in his tone and only quiet disappointment. Roy smirked. "Well, that's very noble of you, but maybe next time you should come dressed like someone who belongs here." The remark stung, not just for Manny, but for everyone who heard it. Whispers spread quickly. Did he just say that to him? That's too much. Why is he talking to him like that? Manny's wife, Jinky, took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. His security detail, stationed discreetly outside, hadn't been called in, because Manny didn't want drama. He believed that how you respond to disrespect reveals your true strength. He nodded slowly and said, "I understand, sir. But sometimes respect has nothing to do with clothes." Roy rolled his eyes, annoyed by the response. "Enough. Guards, please." The guards, now visibly conflicted, looked between Manny and Roy. One finally said quietly, "Sir, I think we should double-check with the organizers first." Roy's expression darkened. He wasn't used to being questioned. "You're refusing a direct order?" The guard hesitated. "It's just there might be a misunderstanding, sir." Meanwhile, the murmuring crowd grew louder. Phones were clearly filming now. People could sense something important was happening, the kind of scene that exposes true character. A woman nearby whispered, "That's so embarrassing. He's being so rude." Another added, "That man's too calm." "Who is he?" Manny turned toward Jinky and gave her a reassuring nod. "It's okay," he whispered. "Let's not argue. We know the truth." Roy scoffed, mistaking Manny's calm for weakness. "Typical," he muttered. "When called out, you all play the victim card." Those words, dripping with entitlement, shifted the mood entirely. Even those who had stayed silent began shaking their heads. Then one voice from the corner of the room spoke up. Not loud, but clear enough for others to hear. "Wait, isn't that Manny Pacquiao?" The whisper spread like wildfire. Heads turned, eyes widened. People who hadn't recognized him earlier now started to realize what was happening. Roy blinked, confused, looking around as murmurs rippled. "That's the world champion. Senator Pacquiao." "Oh my God, is he serious?" But Manny didn't react. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply stood tall, quietly watching the scene unfold. The guards now looked horrified. One whispered to the other, "Sir, that's really him." Roy's proud posture faltered slightly. His jaw tightened. He glanced at Manny again, searching his face, realizing too late what he'd done. But Manny didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence, dignified, powerful, unbothered, was louder than any speech. And as the crowd began to buzz with recognition, cameras flashing and whispers growing louder, everyone knew the moment was about to shift completely. Have you ever seen someone treated unfairly because of how they looked? Tell me in the comments where you're watching this from, and wait till you see what happens next. The entire ballroom had fallen into an uneasy silence. Every phone in the room seemed to be recording now. Guests who moments ago were laughing over champagne now stood frozen, watching the drama unfold. Roy Chiongbian's expression shifted between confusion and disbelief. The whispers grew louder, too loud to ignore. "That's Manny Pacquiao, the boxing legend. Wait, he's also a senator, right?" Roy's smirk faded as the truth began to settle in. He had just ordered his guards to throw out one of the most respected men in the country, in front of dozens of witnesses. But pride is a stubborn thing. Instead of apologizing, Roy doubled down. "I don't care who he is," he snapped. "This is a private event and I don't like surprises." Manny looked at him quietly, his calm gaze steady and almost compassionate. There was no anger, no ego, only disappointment. He took a slow step forward, his voice calm and clear. "Sir, I didn't mean to surprise anyone," he said softly. "I was invited here to help raise money for children who don't have access to education. I didn't come here as a senator or a boxer. I came as a Filipino who wants to help." A few people clapped softly in the back, uncertain if it was appropriate, but they couldn't help it. There was power in his humility. Roy's jaw tightened. He could feel control slipping away, and that made him even angrier. "Look, I don't need a lecture," he said harshly. "I've built this foundation myself. I know who's on the guest list. I don't remember seeing your name." Before Manny could reply, a woman approached from the other side of the room, one of the event organizers. She looked anxious. "Mr. Chiongbian," she said quickly, "Senator Pacquiao was personally invited. He donated a significant amount to the scholarship program. There must be some misunderstanding." The color drained from Roy's face. His eyes darted between the woman and Manny, who stood silently, not gloating, not smirking, just watching. "You donated?" Roy muttered, his voice quieter now. "Yes," Manny said gently, "but not for recognition. For the children." The humility in his tone made the entire room ache with shame for how he'd been treated. The guests began whispering again, but this time their tone was different, filled with admiration for Manny and disgust toward Roy's arrogance. Still, Roy couldn't let go of his pride completely. He tried to laugh it off. "Ah, well, you know how these things go. Security sometimes overreacts." But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't the guards who had overreacted. It was him. Manny could have embarrassed Roy right then. He could have called him out, shamed him in front of everyone, and the crowd would have cheered him on. But that wasn't Manny's way. He took a step closer and said quietly, "Sir, I've been in many fights in my life. Some in the ring, some outside of it. But the hardest fights are not against opponents, they're against pride." Roy blinked, unsure how to respond. The line hit him harder than a punch. Manny continued, his voice still gentle but now carrying weight that filled the room. "Respect doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how we treat people, especially those we think are beneath us. Because one day we'll all stand equal again. Titles fade. Character doesn't." The crowd fell completely silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Roy's face softened slightly. He looked down, suddenly unable to meet Manny's gaze. His arrogance was crumbling under the weight of truth spoken with grace. Manny smiled faintly and extended his hand. "It's okay, sir," he said. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." For a few long seconds, Roy just stared at that hand. The same hand that had lifted championship belts, signed laws, and built homes for the poor. Then slowly he shook it. The crowd erupted in applause, not loud or chaotic, but steady, respectful, heartfelt. Manny nodded to the audience and turned to his wife. "Let's sit," he whispered. "We didn't come here to argue. We came here to give." As they took their seats, the applause continued, spreading like a wave of unity. Guests who had stood by quietly now felt proud. Not because of Manny's fame, but because he had shown what true class looks like. Roy returned to his table, quieter than before. The embarrassment on his face was unmistakable, but somewhere in his eyes was also the beginning of understanding. That moment, captured on dozens of phones and shared online within hours, would soon inspire millions. Have you ever seen someone turn humiliation into respect just by staying calm? Tell me your thoughts in the comments and wait till you see what happened next. The applause faded into a soft hum of voices, whispers, sighs, and the quiet click of phone cameras still recording. But what lingered wasn't noise, it was awareness. Everyone in that ballroom had just witnessed something rare. A man who could have fought back, humiliated, and destroyed his accuser, yet chose grace. Manny Pacquiao sat back down beside his wife, his expression peaceful, almost as if nothing had happened. He adjusted his sleeves, smiled faintly at Jinky, and whispered, "Let's focus on the children. That's why we're here." But around them, the atmosphere had completely changed. Guests who had ignored him earlier now couldn't look away. Some looked guilty, others ashamed. Many were clearly replaying the last few minutes in their minds, how they had judged him too quickly, just as Roy had. Across the room, Roy Chiongbian sat stiffly, his glass of wine untouched. His confident grin was gone, replaced by the weight of a realization he couldn't escape. He had tried to remove Manny Pacquiao, a man loved by millions, not just for his victories, but for his heart. And worse, he'd done it not because of anything Manny said or did, but because of how he looked. The event organizer returned to the microphone, her hands trembling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice unsteady, "let's take a moment to thank Senator Manny Pacquiao for not only supporting our cause, but for reminding us what true respect looks like." The entire room stood and applauded again. Louder, stronger, more genuine this time. Manny simply nodded in thanks, rising briefly to bow his head before sitting down again. He didn't bask in the attention. He didn't grandstand. He just smiled, and humble as ever, Roy stayed seated. His eyes darted around the room, seeing the judgment in people's faces. His peers avoided eye contact. Some shook their heads. Others whispered behind their napkins. A man at the next table leaned over and said quietly, "Roy, that wasn't right." "You owe him an apology." Roy didn't answer. His pride was still clinging to him, desperate not to let go. But then, something unexpected happened. A small boy, maybe 10 years old, walked up to Manny's table holding a folded pamphlet from the event. He looked nervous but determined. "Sir, can I shake your hand?" he asked softly. Manny smiled warmly. "Of course." He reached out and clasped the boy's hand gently. The boy looked up with wide eyes. "My dad said you build homes for poor families. He said you help people even when no one's watching. I want to be like you someday." The room fell silent again. Cameras turned. That innocent moment, pure, unfiltered, hit harder than any speech. Manny leaned down, patting the boy's shoulder. "Then remember this," he said kindly. "It doesn't matter how much money you have. What matters is how much love you give." Applause broke out again, softer this time, emotional, sincere. Roy's eyes glistened. For the first time that evening, he didn't look angry or defensive. He looked ashamed. He took a deep breath, stood up slowly, and walked toward Manny's table. The crowd went quiet again. Every eye followed him. He stopped in front of Manny, hesitated, then said quietly, "Senator, I owe you an apology. I was wrong." Manny looked up, his face kind. He gestured for Roy to sit. "No need, sir," Manny said gently. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them." Roy shook his head. "No, please. Let me say this." His voice trembled slightly. "I judged you without knowing who you were. I thought I was protecting my reputation, but I ended up losing my respect instead." The humility in his tone surprised everyone, even himself. Manny smiled faintly. "You didn't lose it, sir. You found it." The crowd applauded again, louder than ever. Some guests even wiped tears from their eyes. The moment felt bigger than an apology. It was a lesson being lived right in front of them. Roy extended his hand, and this time Manny stood and shook it firmly. The two men exchanged a look, not of equals in wealth or power, but of equals in humanity. As they stood side by side, the cameras flashed. That single photo, the humbled elite and the gracious champion, would soon make headlines around the world. But at that moment, none of that mattered to Manny. He turned back toward the stage as the event continued, quietly whispering to Jinky, "Respect is free. We just forget to give it sometimes." If you believe respect should never depend on wealth or status, type "respect" in the comments, and wait till you see what happened next when the world saw this video. By the time the event ended, the story had already begun to escape the ballroom walls. The moment Roy Chiongbian stood before Manny Pacquiao and apologized was recorded on dozens of phones. Within hours, those clips flooded social media: Facebook, X, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, each one telling the same story. Businessman humiliates Manny Pacquiao, and then gets humbled himself. The video spread like wildfire. Hashtags started trending. "Respect everyone," or Manny Pacquiao, or in true humility. Millions watched, replaying that quiet moment when Manny chose grace instead of anger. Comment sections filled with admiration. That's why Manny is loved worldwide. A true champion, not just in the ring, but in life. He could have embarrassed that man, but chose to forgive. Even those who weren't fans of boxing found themselves inspired. News outlets picked it up, not as a scandal, but as a lesson. By morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines read, "Manny Pacquiao teaches powerful lesson in humility after being disrespected at charity gala." Television shows discussed it. Influencers reacted to it. Motivational pages posted quotes from the incident. Respect doesn't come from status, it comes from character. Manny Pacquiao. Meanwhile, Roy Chiongbian couldn't escape the backlash. His name trended alongside the clip and thousands criticized his arrogance. His team tried to issue statements saying it was a misunderstanding, but people had already seen the footage. One viral comment summed it up. "The man who built his image on power just got schooled by a man who built his legacy on humility." For a day or two, Roy avoided public appearances. But deep inside, the humiliation had turned into reflection. He rewatched the clip, not once but many times, focusing not on himself but on the calm look in Manny's eyes when he said, "Respect doesn't come from money or status. It comes from how we treat people." Those words hit differently now. They didn't feel like a lecture anymore. They felt like truth. So Roy did something unexpected. He reached out. He called Manny personally, not through assistants or PR agents, and asked if they could meet privately. Manny agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, they sat face to face in a quiet cafe in Makati. No cameras, no crowd, no media, just two men and a pot of black coffee between them. Roy started softly, his tone different from before, humble, sincere. "Senator, I want to thank you for what you said that night. You could have humiliated me in front of everyone and I would have deserved it. But you didn't," Manny smiled. "We've all been there, sir. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we learn after." Roy nodded. "You taught me something I won't forget." I built my life on success and recognition. I thought respect was something people owed me. But that night I realized, respect is something you earn by how you treat others. Manny leaned back, thoughtful. You know, I used to think the same, he said. When I was young and poor, people looked down on me. But when I became famous, they started treating me differently. That's when I understood, and people don't really change. Their eyes do. They see status, not soul. Roy looked down, his eyes glistening slightly. I want to make it right, he said. Not for the cameras, not for my reputation, but for the people I hurt with my example. I want to start by doubling the donation I made that night. A week later, Roy released a heartfelt public statement. It wasn't polished by PR teams or filled with excuses. It was raw and honest. I disrespected a man who embodies the values I claim to believe in. That night, Manny Pacquiao taught me something that no amount of money could buy. Humility. To everyone who watched that moment, I hope you remember this. We rise higher not by stepping on others, but by lifting them up. The post went viral again, but this time, not in anger. People praised Roy for taking accountability. The same internet that had condemned him was now forgiving him. Manny didn't comment. He didn't need to. His silence once again said more than words could. Later that month, the two men reunited publicly at another charity event, this time side by side. Roy introduced Manny personally on stage and said, "This man reminded me that greatness isn't about power. It's about heart." The crowd rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. But for Manny, it wasn't about fame, it was about the message. Would you have reacted like Manny? Calm, humble, and forgiving? Tell me in the comments. And wait till you see what happens in the final part, when the world sees Manny's message of equality spread beyond borders. The video that began as a moment of humiliation had now become a global message. Across the Philippines and beyond, the story of Manny Pacquiao's calm dignity spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It had turned into a movement. News anchors replayed the footage, pausing on the moment Manny extended his hand to Roy Chiongbian, a gesture that symbolized forgiveness, grace, and quiet strength. Commentators discussed it on morning shows, calling it a masterclass in humility. In classrooms, teachers used the story to talk about respect. In offices, people shared it during lunch breaks, reflecting on how they treat those beneath their rank. In boxing gyms, young athletes watched the clip and learned that real champions fight with heart, not ego. But no one felt the weight of the story more than Roy Chiongbian himself. A few weeks after their private meeting, Roy made a surprising announcement. He decided to partner with Manny's foundation to fund new community schools and homes for underprivileged families, the very cause Manny had supported at the gala that night. At a press conference, Roy stood beside Manny, not as a man trying to restore his image, but as one who had genuinely changed. He looked out at the crowd of journalists and said, "That night I saw how pride blinds us. I saw how easily power can turn into arrogance. But I also saw how forgiveness can heal, even in front of the whole world. Senator Pacquiao taught me that humility is not weakness, it's wisdom." Manny nodded, smiling humbly as he spoke into the microphone. "We all stumble, but it's how we get up that defines us. I didn't forgive to prove a point. I forgave because that's what faith and respect teach us. If I want the world to change, I have to live that change first." Applause filled the room. For a brief moment, politics, wealth, and status didn't matter. Everyone there felt united by something deeper, the shared belief that respect belongs to everyone. Later that day, social media erupted again, but this time, it wasn't outrage, it was inspiration. Clips of the joint announcement spread everywhere with captions like, "From conflict to compassion." When forgiveness becomes leadership. 2 men, 1 powerful lesson. People began using the hashtag #RespectMovement, inspired by Manny's grace and Roy's transformation. Messages poured in from around the world. A teacher from Kenya wrote, "I showed this to my students. We cried together." A boxer from Mexico said, "I learned that the greatest fight is the one against your own pride." A nurse from Dubai commented, "This story made me rethink how I treat patients who can't speak my language." Even celebrities joined in. One actor tweeted, "Manny Pacquiao didn't just knock out opponents in the ring, he knocked out arrogance in real life." The impact was undeniable. Back in General Santos City, Manny sat quietly on the porch of his home one evening, watching the sunset. His phone buzzed with messages of praise, but he set it aside. He wasn't chasing recognition, he never was. Jinky walked over, smiling softly. "You've started something big, you know," she said. "People are talking about you everywhere again." Manny chuckled. "Not about me," he replied. "About respect." "That's the real victory." He turned to look at the sky, his expression thoughtful. "You can win belts, you can win elections," he said. "But if you can't win people's hearts with kindness, you haven't really won anything." Meanwhile, Roy Chiongbian continued to make good on his promise. He attended community visits with Manny, not as a sponsor seeking attention, but as a student learning from the people he once looked down on. He listened to stories from poor families, shook hands with construction workers, and shared meals with children at the schools they funded together. For the first time in years, Roy felt peace, not because of what he gained, but because of what he finally understood. One afternoon, as they visited a housing site, Roy turned to Manny and said, "You know, I used to think helping people was about charity. Now I see it's about equality." Manny nodded. "Exactly," he said. "When we see others as less than us, we lose sight of who we are. But when we lift them up, we all rise together." The cameras caught that moment. And soon that quote, "When we lift them up, we all rise together," became the slogan of their joint campaign. Posters appeared online and in public spaces, reminding everyone of the simple yet powerful truth that started it all. The story that began with arrogance now stood as a beacon of unity. A billionaire and a boxing legend, two men from different worlds, had become symbols of humility and redemption. And Manny, true to his nature, summed it up perfectly during an interview. "I'm not here to prove I'm better than anyone. I just want people to know, respect should never depend on how someone looks, dresses, or earns. It should come from the heart." The interviewer nodded. "So what do you want people to remember about this?" Manny smiled. "That even when someone disrespects you, don't fight hate with hate. Fight it with grace. Because that's how you win, and not just the fight, but the world. If you believe kindness can change hearts more than anger ever could, type respect in the comments and get ready for the final chapter, where Manny's message reaches beyond borders and inspires a new generation. Months had passed since that unforgettable night in the ballroom, yet the story refused to fade. What began as a confrontation between pride and humility had transformed into a living symbol of change. Everywhere you looked, the message of "respect everyone" had found new life. Schools began celebrating Respect Week, inspired by Manny's example. Churches and community groups held discussions on compassion, fairness, and prejudice. Even corporations used the story in leadership seminars, teaching executives that true power lies in how you treat people who can't give you anything in return. In one Manila classroom, a teacher asked her students, "Who can tell me what Manny Pacquiao did when he was disrespected?" A young boy raised his hand proudly. "He didn't get angry, ma'am. He showed respect instead." The class clapped and the teacher smiled. "That," she said softly, "is what it means to be strong." Meanwhile, Roy Chiongbian had become almost unrecognizable, not in looks but in spirit. He continued working alongside Manny's foundation, quietly funding education projects across Mindanao. He no longer appeared in luxury magazines or flaunted his wealth at high-profile galas. When asked by a journalist why he'd changed so much, Roy simply replied, "Because that night, I realized I was the one who needed to be educated, not about business, but about humanity." His words resonated deeply. For many, it was proof that transformation was possible, that even the proudest hearts could still learn humility. The global movement kept growing. International charities reached out to collaborate. Manny's message of respect began appearing in public campaigns across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Posters, videos, speeches, all carrying his quiet wisdom. "Don't judge by clothes. Don't measure by status. Measure by heart," celebrities quoted him. Presidents referenced his story in conferences. What once was a small moment of injustice had become a worldwide reminder that social justice starts in the simplest acts of empathy. But Manny himself stayed the same. No matter how viral the story became, he kept living modestly, greeting people with a warm smile, helping quietly where he could. One evening, As he walked through a crowded market in General Santos City, vendors called out his name, waving happily. A street kid ran up and offered him a flower made of folded paper. "For you, champ," the boy said shyly. Manny smiled, kneeling to the child's level. "Thank you, Anak," he said, accepting it. "Always be kind, okay? Even when people aren't kind to you," the boy nodded. And the small gesture reminded Manny that this, not the headlines, not the titles, and was his real purpose. Weeks later, Manny was invited to speak at an international conference on leadership and equality in Singapore. Leaders, CEOs, and students from around the world filled the auditorium. When he took the stage, he spoke softly. No fancy words, no teleprompter, just sincerity. "I'm not a perfect man," he began. "I've been poor. I've been rich. I've been praised and I've been insulted. But through it all, I learned one thing. When you respond to hate with hate, nobody wins. But when you respond with respect, everyone learns." The hall was silent, the audience hanging on every word. The night I was told to leave a room, I could have fought back. But I chose peace, not because fighting back proves your strength, but staying kind proves your soul. Applause erupted, standing ovation, cameras flashing. Yet Manny simply bowed his head, thankful. Later that evening, a young delegate approached him backstage. She was from South Africa, tears in her eyes. "Senator Pacquiao," she said, "your story changed how I see people. I was angry at the injustice in my country, but now I understand. Justice begins with how I treat others." Manny smiled warmly. That's where change always begins, in one person's heart. Back in the Philippines, the respect movement kept thriving. Murals of Manny and Roy shaking hands appeared in cities. Schools wrote essays about the story. One mural had the quote, "When we lift them up, we all rise together." It became more than a moment. It became a mindset. And Roy? He continued to live the lesson. He visited communities, listening instead of commanding. He told young entrepreneurs, "Don't let success make you blind. If you forget respect, you lose everything." A year later, the two men met again at another charity event, the same kind of elegant gathering where their story began. This time, when Roy saw Manny walk in, he stood up and personally welcomed him with a warm smile and an embrace. "Welcome, Senator Pacquiao," he said. "This event wouldn't be complete without you." The crowd cheered. Manny laughed softly. "Thank you, sir," he said. "But tonight we're just two people helping others. No titles, no status." They shook hands once more, and that image became the final chapter of their shared story. Two men once divided by pride, now united by purpose. In the months that followed, people still shared the video online, not to gossip, but to remember. It reminded everyone that the world doesn't change through power or fear, but through empathy and grace. Manny's final quote from a later interview summed it up perfectly. "Respect is not something you demand. It's something you give, and when you give it, the world gives it back." If you believe no one should ever be judged by appearance, wealth, or status, type respect in the comments. Follow for more true stories that remind us real strength isn't about winning over others. It's about winning over hate.